In this chapter, we will be learning about the endocrine system. The endocrine system works together with the nervous system to coordinate functions of all body systems. The difference is it uses hormones as opposed to neurons and neurotransmitters. But ultimately, the internal environment of the human body is controlled by nerves and hormones. So almost every single organ that we learn about is regulated by both the nervous system and the endocrine system. So that makes the endocrine system extremely important to homeostasis, maintaining equilibrium within the body. We're going to begin by just comparing those two systems. This table covers 5 major characteristics and compares them between the nervous system and endocrine system. The first one is the mediator molecules. In the nervous system, we learned that it requires nerve impulses that ultimately release neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters are the mediator molecules used in the nervous system. As you recall, some of them are acetylcholine, norepinephrine, serotonin, GABA, glycine, glutamate. Those are a number of neurotransmitters that function in the nervous system. The endocrine system, it's all about hormones. And hormones come in all different forms. They are produced by an organ, typically delivered into the bloodstream, and then they circulate throughout the body until they find their target cell or organ. The target cell or organ is the one that has the proper receptors for that hormone. The site of mediator action is where that mediator molecule is released and where it functions. The nervous system, the neurotransmitters function at a synapse. A synapse is the connection between the neuron and whatever cell that neuron is controlling. It could be another neuron, it could be a muscle, it could be a gland, but that's the site of action of the mediator molecule. For the endocrine system, it's typically far from the site of release, and it's whatever target cell has the receptor. So it could be released from an organ in your brain, like the pituitary gland, but not function or act until it reaches, say, the ovaries or the testes. The types of target cells for the nervous system include all types of muscle, smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and skeletal muscle, as well as glands and other neurons. The endocrine system controls many of those same cells. The endocrine system can regulate smooth muscle, it can regulate cardiac muscle. It does not regulate skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle, if you recall, is triggered to contract using neurons, and neurons only. But the endocrine system can control glands as well. Almost any cell in the body is controlled by hormones. Again, the exception being skeletal muscle. Time varies dramatically between the nervous system and the endocrine system. Typically, if we need a quick response, the body uses a nervous system. If the response is more long-term and not necessarily immediate, it might use more of a hormone, or it might use both. But the nervous system acts within milliseconds, whereas the endocrine system works within seconds to hours or even days. The duration varies as well. The nervous system can stimulate and then stop very quickly, so very brief duration. Hormones typically generate longer reactions, longer actions, sometimes seconds to days. So hopefully this allows you to better understand the endocrine system by comparing it to a system you've already learned about, being the nervous system. The next thing I'd like to do is start to look at the different classes that hormones are placed under. Now, many of these hormones we'll get to later on, so don't be too concerned of the names and what they do. But this is just to make you aware that there are hormones that are lipid soluble, and then there are hormones that are water soluble. And that's a very important concept because they function much differently, which we will get to in the next video. But some of the lipid-soluble hormones include steroid hormones, thyroid hormones, and certain gases like nitric oxide. But let's first look at the steroid hormones. First thing I want to point out is many of these steroid hormones are derived from a molecule called cholesterol. And at this point, you should be writing down cholesterol. Cholesterol is what we call a precursor. It is used and chemically modified to make something else, which are these steroid hormones. Steroid hormones include aldosterone, cortisol, calcitriol, which is vitamin D, testosterone, which we've probably heard of, estrogens, which we've probably heard of, progesterone. Those are all categorized as steroid hormones. And we'll talk more about what these hormones do. The next subclass of lipid solubles are your thyroid hormones. And we'll obviously be getting to the thyroid gland a little bit later, but the thyroid gland produces a number of hormones, two of which are known as T3 and T4. The 3 and 4 stand for how many iodine atoms are part of the molecule. Triiodothyronine has 3. The triiodo standing for 3 iodines. Thyroxine has 4. They function very similarly, and we'll get to their function later on, but they are lipid-soluble hormones as opposed to water-soluble. Finally, this table mentions nitric oxide. We probably won't be talking too much about it. We might get into it a little more in the cardiovascular system because it will actually affect blood vessel diameter. It dilates blood vessels. But it's a lipid-soluble gas. The next class are your water-soluble hormones. Now notice all the different names here. Most hormones are water-soluble, and that allows them to circulate in blood very easily because blood is largely water. So we're going to look in a minute at the major differences between lipid-soluble hormones and water-soluble hormones. But one is the fact that if you are a lipid-soluble hormone, you're going to struggle being in blood because blood is water-based. So typically the lipid-soluble hormones require some sort of transporter in the bloodstream. But water-soluble hormones can be subcategorized as an amine hormone, which amine refers to amino acid. So these hormones are all derived from an amino acid. Kind of like the steroids are derived from cholesterol. These hormones all are made from an amino acid. For example, epinephrine and norepinephrine, collectively known as the catecholamines, are derived from an amino acid called tyrosine. Melatonin is derived from an amino acid called tryptophan. Histamine is derived from an amino acid called histidine. But for now, we're going to keep it simple and just make sure we understand that if you're derived from an amino acid, you're typically a water-based or water-soluble hormone. Then there's a number of hormones that are larger molecules in that there's more than one amino acid used to make them. They're peptides and protein hormones. Oxytocin, shown here, is a 9 amino acid hormone. So it's a very small hormone. 9 amino acids in the world of molecules is fairly small. We call those smaller amino acid based hormones peptides. So oxytocin would be an example of a peptide hormone. Another one on here you've probably heard of is insulin. There's insulin. Insulin is also a protein hormone. It's made up of about 51 amino acids, so it's a little bigger than oxytocin, but what they have in common is they're both water-soluble peptides or proteins. Then there's a class called eicosanoids. We probably won't talk too much about them until we get to the immune system, because they're largely involved in inflammation. And they're known as prostaglandins and leukotrienes. So that's the end of this first video, and two major concepts to keep straight. One, the differences between the nervous system and the endocrine system. Two, the fact that there are two broad categories we can categorize hormones into, lipid-soluble and water-soluble. And then each of those have some subcategories to them. But in the next video, we're going to be looking at how these hormones, whether you're lipid-soluble or water-soluble, how do they function? How do they get to the target cell and cause that target cell to change or to do something differently?